Hi, Andrew.
Hi everyone, sorry to be a few minutes late. I was having some computer issues.
Hey, no worries, no
No
worries.
worries.
No worries at all. Yeah, so I guess we can get started then. Since I mean people may or may not be streaming in, but yeah, we have like a few people, I guess.
Awesome, that sounds good. Yeah, happy to talk about anything. Looks like we got about 7 in the room, so
Cool.
happy to dive in on whatever anyone's interested in.
Sounds good. Yeah, so just to give broad context, I'm Zhao. I'm one of the organizers of YHack, and I will be quote unquote like moderating this fireside chat as much as it needs to be. I think it's
Awesome.
can be
It's
pretty.
nice to meet you over video too.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah. So yeah, I guess to kick things off, I will give my guess. So this is Andrew Myers. So he's the founder and CEO of RippleMatch. And in case you don't already know, RippleMatch is one of our sponsors for YHack this year. And it's also a platform to improve the college recruiting experience by automating entry-level recruiting, as well as on the flip side, also allowing startups and more mid-sized companies and nonprofits to compete with the larger companies in university hiring. And he's also, he was originally Yale class of 2017 as well. And he actually started or launched RippleMatch from his college dorm room with his co-founder, who since then, RippleMatch has raised over $10 million in venture funding and brought on many customers like Amazon and Pfizer and TripAdvisor. So without further ado, I guess I would like to invite Andrew to introduce a bit more about himself if there's anything else that, I forgot to mention, I guess.
I think you covered it well. Everyone on the Zoom call is a Yale student, right? Is that correct?
Not necessarily. They are all participants of YHack, but we do have I'm not sure if for this particular Zoom call if it's true, but we have participants.
I'm not.
Outside. Yeah.
Awesome. Do we want to just do? I know with Fireside chats they're sometimes a little larger, but it looks like we've got like 6 or 7 on this call, which is actually great. Do people just want to maybe go around and introduce themselves? I'm totally happy to dive in more on my experience, but would also just like love to hear a little bit more about each of you as well.
Sure. I guess that sounds great. I mean, I guess I'll start because I didn't
introduce
myself.
You're gonna go to Karen and Jonathan from there.
Yeah, so I'm a senior at Yale, majoring in computer science and math. I've been involved in YHack for the past 3 years now. So yeah, probably gonna be a software engineer in the future. Just your traditional coder monkey, I guess, is what I would call it. I'll just go down and call people because it's
that would be great.
Harder. So down the list is Elizabeth.
Yeah, my name's Elizabeth. I'm one of the co-directors of YHack along with Zhao this year. And there's another director, Justin, but he's not on the call. I'm a junior at Yale studying statistics and political science. And I've been involved with YHack since my first year. And I'm in Silliman, for the people who are from Yale.
I'm in Hopper.
Nice. I was poli-sci in Davenport too, just for everybody who that's relevant to.
Sorry. Next would be Jonathan.
Yeah. So I'm a first year TD at Yale. I'm studying CS, and pretty. I think also interested in a little bit of philosophy and data science.
Awesome.
And next is Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela. I'm a sophomore at the University of Toronto up in Canada. I study computer science and bioinformatics.
Nice, that's awesome. I'm a big fan of Toronto in general. I'm low-key a big Raptors
fan. Good to know. I think everyone in Canada is recently.
Yeah, it's I can see why.
Nice. Next we have Karen. Did I get that right?
Yes. Karan.
Okay.
So I'm a graduate student studying computer science at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And I'm a participant at YHack, and I'm pretty interested to see where our project goes and to like make new friends and see the other projects as well. So yeah, that's me.
Nice. And I think the last person in the room is Zheyuan.
Yeah, you're right. I apologize for the broken webcam because it has been broken for years. It's an integrated webcam, maybe some CMOS issues. So I'm also a participant in Hack Yale. I'm like a master's student in University of Washington, studying computer science, and just curious, get in the room.
Cool. And I think Andy just joined the room as well. If you want to, okay, so Andy, we're introducing ourselves because this is a small group, so we're just going around introducing ourselves. So if you want to just go ahead.
Joe, while we're waiting for
Yeah,
Andy, just want to say thanks so much for the warm introduction. And it's great to be here tonight. I not that long ago was also kind of hacking away in my Yale dorm room, so I know exactly what this process is like. And for all the non-Yale students here too, so much of our mission is basically kind of eliminating geographic barriers and helping connect amazing students at schools all over the country and the world with really great opportunities. And so awesome to have you here as well. It's always fun to talk to a little bit more of an eclectic crowd too. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, I think Zhao summed up my experience with RippleMatch pretty well. I think, what doesn't show up on a resume is that we started it from our Yale dorm room, as you mentioned, but those early years were incredibly humble. I imagine if you're in YHack, there's at least some temptation to sort of like to build things and see if you can start things from scratch. But I think it can often be an incredibly intimidating process actually starting a company out of that and actually seeing where that goes. And so if I can shed light on that experience at all, I'm happy to talk about how ugly it often looks at the beginning and how, just incredibly challenging it can be and why I'm really glad that I went for it anyway. It's been a remarkable journey for us. We basically went from the two of us in our dorm room to a team of about 40 in New York right now. We'll probably grow to 80 over the course of the coming year. So still very much in like hyper growth mode. As Zhao mentioned, we work with everybody from really large companies like Amazon and Cognizant and Pfizer, all the way down to really small startups and nonprofits. So kind of run the gamut. But our whole mission is really to make college recruiting right. And so I think a lot of what we believe in is that I think a lot of really great students maybe don't have parents with amazing networks and don't necessarily have access to, the kind of like LinkedIn connections and the kind of professional connections that make it really easy out of graduation to find the right job. And so what we do is take everything that students are looking for, take everything that companies are looking for, and then it's all AI enabled, but we basically serve as that connector, getting students into the right job. So John, I'll turn it over to you for more specific questions, and I'm happy to take this wherever is most useful to all of you, but just also wanted to provide that kind of high level context for everyone as well.
Yeah, no worries. I think that was great. It was good context. So I guess we can just start from the beginning. Since you were talking about it, like what motivated you to start building RippleMatch out of like your college dorm room? Like what gave you the idea of building this platform, and how did it get started? I guess if we're gonna give context for everyone.
Yeah, I think there's often this like misconception out there that like companies are born with some like magical dream, and then that like your path is like figured out or whatever. And I think in reality, it's often way more kind of like fragmented and humble than that. I think for us, we just like wanted an interesting project to work on. I imagine it's a little similar for a lot of you, but I think sometimes like school is like only flexing one muscle, and you realize that you could do something that's a lot more creative. And if you're able to code and if you're able to kind of bring the right team together, I'm not able to code too, just for what it's worth. My co-founder Eric's the technical one, but you're actually able to create something really, really magic. And so I think we just thought it would be cool if we could design a better way for students to get connected with opportunities. I don't think there was a lot of thought of like, oh, what's the long-term financial model going to be? How do we determine product market fit in the earliest of days? It was just a problem that a lot of our friends were having, and we wanted to create a solution that would actually help them.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. So, so like you mentioned, it was more of just like a kind of a side project of sorts that you're trying to create something that will help your friends. So what made you make the decision to convert from that to like something that's fully fledged, or pursue that further than just something that's between you and your friends or something, or like, if that makes sense, like making the bigger step into making it like a company, I guess?
I think it's funny. Like, I think companies are such a series of like small little leaps after small little leaps. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, we're doing millions of dollars in revenue and have all these customers. And it suddenly starts to feel really real. But I think in those early days, it was really like sort of series by series. So the sort of story that we had is my co-founder, Eric, was supposed to work at Facebook and had a very good sort of software engineering. He'd interned there the summer before. He was supposed to go work on their ad metrics team. I'm sure it's not a story that's dissimilar to a lot of you guys, but I think he had always been kind of labeled a little bit as like this, like, you know, quantitative genius his whole life, or like, I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of you from kind of high school backgrounds you came, like, just because you can code and just because you've got this skill set, everybody pigeonholes you as this like technical person who should be like hammering away all day, just like creating stuff. And sometimes that's what you want, and that's really awesome. But Eric was also just like brilliant from a business perspective and from a product perspective, and didn't want to work in such a narrow role. I also think Facebook, well, it was a good job. I think mission wise, he was like, do I want to spend the next 5 years of my life building out ad technology too? And so I think he wanted to do something that was both more mission driven and let him flex a little bit more of kind of a comprehensive skill set. And so I think the really huge moment for us was I was working in management consulting. He was actually a year older than me and was supposed to start at Facebook. And I ended up calling him like 2 weeks into my management consulting internship and was basically like, I'm willing to quit this job if you'll like move out to New York and work on this startup with me all summer. And we'd spent, 6 months kind of hacking around and getting our early Yale user base built up. But by that point, it was a really humble, we had no paying customers. It was kind of a crazy leap. But I think we both realized that we really loved working together and thought it had a lot of potential. And then I was also just like bored as hell in my management consulting job and like not enjoying that at all, which made it a little bit of an easier decision. I sometimes wonder if that like internship had been perfect, if I would have ever taken that like huge leap forward. But long story short, he was like, yeah, I'll be there in 2 days, and like moved from Portland to New York. We ended up renting an apartment in Bushwick. Both our little brothers actually moved out with us to kind of help form the early team and do a lot of marketing work on the ground. We ended up launching at Cornell that summer and sort of proved that we could replicate a lot of our success outside of just Yale. And then I think I had this huge moment where like I was sort of like, do I like work on this full time or do I go back to school? Which was like a really big decision for me. I'm not sure kind of what types of family backgrounds you guys come from, but like at least for me, I grew up with a single mom who was a teacher, and so like her like dream was that like I would like graduate from Yale, and like that was something that was clearly really important to her. So telling her a year before graduation, hey, I'm actually going to stay in New York and like work on building this company, was a conversation that I was like totally scared to have. She ended up actually being really supportive, but I think that decision to not go back to Yale is what allowed Eric to, turn down his like 300K with stock options and bonus offer from Facebook and actually like dive into creating something. And we ended up raising money from Kevin Ryan, who was on the Yale board for a while and has done a lot of amazing work in the New York tech scene. He's founded MongoDB and Gilt and Business Insider and Zola and a huge kind of range of companies, but he backed us pretty early, and that allowed us a fair amount of rope to like screw up and learn a lot of lessons and figure out a lot. And then I'd say within a year of that, we started to really figure it out. But even after we raised funding, even after I dropped out of school, there was just like a huge amount of like figuring shit out and actually figuring out like how we were really able to build a business and make it all work effectively.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. So I think to back it up a bit, I think it's helpful to like talk to the people here about how it's like in initial stages, like when you were still in school. I mean, before you decided to leave Yale to work on this full time. Like how was it like juggling both the schoolwork as well as like this startup, which I can imagine probably takes up like most of your time every week. So how do you balance your life in that era, I guess?
So yeah, it's a great question. So at least for me, I'm not sure how it is for you. And I was like poli-sci and history, so I maybe had it a little bit easier, but like I basically just didn't do work in the first month of each semester because you could kind of backlog everything to the end of the semester. So at first it was like easy. We had all this free time. We were just like working on everything. I think what I remember getting hard was during like finals season in particular, when we had a lot of like company stuff we had to get out, but then we were managing it with finals. And Elizabeth, I think you said you were poli-sci, right?
Yeah, I'm a statistics major, but this semester I decided to potentially try to double major in poli-sci.
Got it. So your statistics. So yeah, I basically
I just started.
Yeah, I basically realized pretty quickly that the best way to sort of figure it all out was I would write my poli-sci papers in like the day and really try to like get them done. And then I would actually, Eric was like a super late night worker, so he would do his homework from like midnight to 4, and then I would wake up at 4 and he was like his end of day and my start of day, but we do the like 4 hours of startup work that we needed to do. And I think sometimes like the hustle is like oversold, but in those early days, like so much of what you're trying to figure out is like, does a co-founder actually have the commitment to like go the distance with you, because you're going to do some pretty crazy things over those couple of years getting it ready, and you sort of want to like weed out if someone's not like fully in for the journey early. So we actually had a friend who was like kind of the third co-founder in the early days, but I think once we started getting those really crazy schedules and started to max out our credit cards, and he was thinking like, do I give up my job at McKinsey? It was pretty clear that like he wasn't down for really any of those three things. And you need a kind of maniacal level of commitment if you're actually going to go for something full time. So it became clear to us that we were both really passionate about it and balanced each other out pretty well, and that we wanted to kind of start the company together rather than do it with the three of us.
I see. That's really interesting. So essentially, there is also I would say, I mean, I guess you're saying that there is also something to talk about, like choosing who to start the company with, and like how to decide like whether someone is willing to commit to the time as well. I guess there's not really much. Yeah. So I guess the next thing that you have been talking about a lot is about like the funding and where you get like the initial stages from for the company. So I was just wondering where, like as a college student, where will you get the initial funding from to start a RippleMatch? Or essentially that.
Going back to I think part of the question, like a little bit before that too, just on the like co-founder sort of dynamics and how you choose a co-founder, that's just like one thing I draw like a little bit of attention to. I think that really is like one of the most important decisions you make. And it's so easy to just choose someone because they're friends with you or you're like comfortable with them, but you're really choosing like a business partner. And it's important that they're incredibly competent, because in those early days, it's going to be the 2 of you or 3 of you who are having to figure everything out. And so I think I got really lucky there, honestly. Like I think I had no idea Eric was going to be as like great as he would ultimately be as a co-founder. But I think the one thing that we did really well is I chose Eric because I thought he was really smart and I knew he could build a really good product, rather than the fact that we were like best friends. We actually didn't know each other like crazy well. We played a little sports together, a little beer pong from time to time, but weren't like, super close friends, but I respected him. And I think that base of respect is really, really important. And I think it's sometimes easy to be like, oh shit, we've been working on this stuff for like 6 weeks. And that's a while. And like, I don't want to have this hard conversation about this like potential co-founder not feeling right. But imagine when you've been working with the person for 6 years, right? Like you better be pretty darn sure in those early days that they're a great person to work with. And I actually think the idea can change, you'll grow, everything will change, but your co-founder won't change. And so that's sort of the one decision you have to get right if the company is going to be successful. Or you got to fire him fast if you get it wrong, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I saw this post on Facebook a while back about the two beers and a puppy rule or something. So it's about like whether you would trust a friend whether you want ask a friend to have 2 beers with you versus take care of a puppy for you. And I think this is the distinction you're trying to make, like between having a friend that you can like be friends with versus someone that you can count on in terms of doing as a business partner, I guess.
I would totally confirm that. Yeah, I actually just got a Great Dane puppy, and Eric does a great job caring for the puppy. I can confirm that that's true.
Cool. Yeah. So I think to everyone else in the room, we'll probably open it up to questions from the audience as well. Soon, I think I can ask maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then if you're okay with it, Andrew, we'll probably just see if anyone else has other questions, because I don't want to be like dictating.
Yeah,
everything as
100%.
well.
And just so everyone knows too, as you're like thinking of questions, like anything is fair game. I will just be as like honest as I possibly can be. I remember sitting in very similar sessions where like founders just talked about how like great their companies were, and I'm very happy to dive into all the things we've done wrong and like challenges too. So whatever you're curious about, I'm happy to dive in on too.
Sure. I think then with that, I'll probably just ask one last question to give a context and a bridge to like a bridge to the question from the audience, which would be more of like, how has RippleMatch evolved since your initial days, and how does your day-to-day life look like nowadays compared to how it was when you first started out, I guess. And then after that, we can look at audience questions probably.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the thing that's sort of crazy about founding a startup is that your job literally changes almost completely year over year. So your first year is building a company, you sort of need to have one founder who can like really talk to customers and sell the product, and you need one founder who can actually build product and understand like what's kind of going on from that perspective. But you're individual contributors, so you're doing everything yourself. The second year, you're like hiring people under you often, if it's going well, to like handle these different functions. And so you need to learn how to become a really good manager. And then that lasts a couple years. And then you're eventually hiring managers of managers, which is like a totally different skill set. And before you know it, your job is like, you're still like firefighting and doing individual stuff on the most important stuff. But your job is really just to communicate and set the right vision. And there's too much stuff to do for you to really have your hands like too all over any one project. And so it's really funny. Like, I think often the tendency we have is when we're doing something and it's made us successful, we double down on that behavior. But I think one of the most important things is like, as you hit each stage of growth, to sort of be like, oh, wow, what made me successful last year is probably not going to make me successful this coming year. And if you don't like do that naturally, there'll be some things that like force you to do it because the challenge just gets too big and you have to change your style. But yeah, I mean, my day-to-day has gone from like personally out there selling the product, talking with Eric constantly about like what we were going to like build, doing all the marketing, all of the like materials, to like sort of like hiring people who are ideally better than me at all those things. And at some point, all you really own is like product, hiring, and fundraising. And those are like the really, really important things.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess we'll transition to audience questions, which I guess there are already some people submitting questions. So that there's this slido.com link where you can add questions, and you could also upvote questions that you prefer to be answered first. Yeah, and I guess we can just kick things off with the first one, which it's pretty interesting. So what do you think was the biggest mistake that you made while running RippleMatch, I guess, or starting out RippleMatch as well?
I think the biggest thing is that actually kills like most startups in the early days is like a lack of belief. I think that like it's so easy, and the reason that most people don't found companies often later on in life is if you're too logical about things, you can see the like 10 million ways your company just like sucks in the early days, because you don't have a good engineering team, you don't have really good product designers, like all that stuff is like really true. And so I think it's really easy to be like too pessimistic. And in reality, like you sometimes just have to have like faith and crazy belief. And if you're smart and persevere, like you'll figure stuff out. The other thing, and I know I'm kind of listing two answers here, is just like you have to listen to the customer. Like I'm not sure if any of you saw, I'm blanking on the name of it, but like Meg Whitman's company that just like totally tanked after raising like $1 billion in funding without actually really discovering product market fit. Like the early days of a startup are all about talking and listening to the customer. And that's true as you scale too. So just make sure you don't build a product that like you think is cool, but no one else does. It's really the customer that has to reign supreme. And so you should be putting out, I'm sure some of you have read like books on like agile development and like lean startup methodology and all of that, but you want to get stuff out into the customer's hands super, super early. And then you want to iterate really quickly and have fast product release cycles, I would say too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree with that. So essentially with that, I guess the two things that you mentioned are somewhat intention, I guess. So the first one is like, if you have an idea, you just run with it and try not to worry too much about the issues. Like whether try not to worry about it being not perfect or something. And then the second one is more of trying to filter out the ideas by listening to the customer. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you strike a balance of that? Like, when do you know when you need to pivot an idea, or when to persist on an idea, or when to like pivot on an idea? Like, how do you determine that? Like, what's the best way that you have found?
Yeah, threading that needle is really, really hard. And I realize those two things seem like slightly in conflict. I think what I would say is, first of all that really matters is what the customer thinks. I'm not sure, like, I guess you guys have SciCity now. I used to have like the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, but I still remember going in there and pitching RippleMatch to whoever their like resident entrepreneur was. And he was like, this is a really bad idea. Like, this will never work. And if we just like folded up and listened to this random kind of retired consultant, sort of shit on our idea, we would have never actually ended up building any of this. And so I think it's important to ignore like early angel investors. I think it's important to sort of ignore the noise that maybe comes from your friends. Like, they don't really know what's going on. I think customers you do need to listen to, and the heart of the business is building something that they'll pay for. Just don't get discouraged if they tell you your product's really bad, because if they're talking to you, they probably think it could eventually be cool, and sort of take all that early feedback as a sign of what they think it could be, rather than like a cap on your potential, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next question, which would be according to this. What factors help you to make the decision to drop out of Yale and the consulting path and go for Match? Yeah, I guess this is something that is quite interesting. So I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so I'm probably a little biased here. I think Yale is like a unique bubble when it comes to like the beauty of management consulting and finance. And I think a lot of kids who had no idea what consulting and finance were when they entered college, suddenly junior year, everybody's queuing outside the study. I guess not this year, but without COVID, it's typically the study or the Omni. And it's like suddenly everybody is like defined by whether they get an interview at like Bain or McKinsey. And then what's going to happen that's really funny is all those really smart friends of yours who like got those jobs and thought they were like the coolest kids in the world, 3 years later, they're going to be totally bored and are going to end up for the most part quitting those jobs to do stuff in the startup world, or to do stuff that's a little bit more interesting, or to go to business school. And so I think I think I was lucky to sort of realize pretty quickly that I think consulting and finance were both potentially a little over glamorized. And I think that if you're willing to take risks, and I don't think startups are for everybody, they can be like eating glass those first couple years. But if you really like having a lot of autonomy and ability to just like shape your own stuff, like all of you are like clearly like super smart, like have worked really hard to like get to where you are. And I think a lot of it is about just like trusting yourself, because realistically, you can be in a position where you're learning a lot more at a smaller company where you're getting more responsibility than if you're just kind of like a cog in the wheel at a big company. And I think I kind of appreciated that 2 weeks into my consulting internship, which I then promptly quit. So I almost got suckered into, and then it was just like, wait, what am I doing here? I would say.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I definitely feel that cog in a wheel kind of mentality, because I was also interning at Facebook last summer, and I definitely feel what you're saying about that. I guess the next question is more of a bit of, I mean, you could feel free
last thing I'd say, so they'd say about like Facebook or consulting point is like, do not let like perks like convince you that what you are doing is like really like great. Like I think they often like all these companies are so good, and we work with like some of them too, so I have a pretty good sense of their recruiting strategies. There's two things that they say. They're like, you're going to make a huge impact, but they don't define like what the impact is, and everybody wants to make an impact, so that's like really awesome. But like you're often like making a very tiny impact on something that has nothing to do with the social impact, which is how most people read impact. And then like second comment on that is just like perks are often a really good distraction from the fact that you're getting paid a lot less than you'd be making if you were working for yourself or had equity at a younger company that was doing really well. So just like don't let it fool you a little bit too.
For sure. I guess the next question is a bit, I mean, you can feel free to pitch a bit more for this. I mean, since the hackathon, like college students anyway, so you could pitch like RippleMatch and the perks of RippleMatch and how it's differentiated from its competition, I guess.
Yeah.
The product pitch.
So I'm just curious, how many of you are actually like RippleMatch users? Got a couple. Cool. So I think that two things that probably set us apart the most are one, just being very candidate friendly in nature. I think a lot of what we believe is that candidates shouldn't be forced to scour through job boards to find what opportunities are a good fit for them, but they should be algorithmically matched with opportunities where they're really likely to do well in the interview process. And then the connection between them and the company should feel as human as possible. And so what's so different about RippleMatch, and you've probably seen this if you're a student, is you'll get actually connected with opportunities where about 60% of the time that company's actually going to interview you if you end up saying you're interested in the opportunity. So it's just that ability to kind of cut through all the noise and make that really, really human connection. And then I think the other big thing on the employer end is just intelligence. So almost all of the emails that you receive, almost all of the sort of work on the employer side of things is automated. And so a company doesn't have to spend, weeks and weeks systematically reaching out to candidates via LinkedIn or going to campus. They can just put in what they care about, and you'll get a much more balanced ranking of like which candidates are actually likely to be a really good fit, which ends up making a huge impact, especially around diversity recruiting and around reaching schools outside the Ivy League. It's a little ironic because we're Yale students, but I think often like schools have been this big credential for how smart somebody actually is. And there's amazing talent distributed everywhere. And so a lot of what we do is kind of help even the playing field. So if you're Amazon, you're not just recruiting at Stanford, you're actually able to identify that really, really smart student at like Nashville State University who's like top of their class, but you wouldn't have traditionally had the bandwidth to reach out to. And that's because our system kind of takes care of all that outreach for them, and they trust the algorithm to actually find and identify the best candidates for them.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely sounds good. Honestly, so the only reason I didn't use it because I'm already a senior and I actually do have like full-time plans. But yeah, I didn't hear of it before this year, so I probably would have used it otherwise. Sounds good.
Yeah, if any of you have used it and have feedback, I always like love hearing from students, and like that's a lot of what's made our platform better too. So keep me posted if any of you have thoughts in general. But yeah, for sure.
Sure, you can just unmute yourself, and if any of you have any feedback, I think
I actually have an account with RippleMatch, I guess, but I haven't actually used it.
Yeah, and that's okay too. Like I think if you're looking right now, I would encourage you to hop on and fill out a full profile because that's how you tend to get paired with most matches. But if you've got a full-time job, you've already done the heavy lifting, and then we're not necessary. So we tend to work with students who are pretty actively engaged in the job search.
anyone else, any comments?
I've actually never heard of RippleMatch until this hackathon, but when I heard of it, I'm really glad I did because I think it solved a lot of the problems I was facing. Because I'm looking for my first internship this summer, and yeah, I definitely found it was really hard just kind of like going through all these like job boards, and I will definitely be using RippleMatch going forward.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we got, at least for me, a lot of the concept was born out of my own experience of like applying to jobs and then finding out like 3 weeks later that the role had already been filled, but I'd wasted all this time applying. And so I think the challenge with the current system is it's really high friction, right? Like employers get flooded with so many applications that they can't actually sort through all the noise that's coming through their inbound job funnels. And then because candidates aren't hearing back, they end up applying to way more jobs. And so it creates this like cycle where no one's like quite getting through and there's a lot of friction. And so our goal is to just be very targeted about connecting the right people. So you're actually able to connect with companies that are interested in you, or if you're a company, you're able to actually find students that are qualified for the position.
So, Andrew, like you were talking about matching companies with students from outside the Ivy League and other colleges as well. Does it work the other way too? Like matching candidates with the companies that you hardly known of, hardly heard of, but are still really good companies. Does it work that way too?
Yeah, that's a huge part of what we do. So a lot of our biggest accounts are like with actually like companies that provide great like professional development, high paying jobs, but you've maybe never heard of. So like McMaster Carr is like this nuts and bolts manufacturer out in Chicago, but they have this amazing leadership program where right out of college, you get to manage like a team of warehouse workers while also learning like the basics of finance and some design stuff. And it's just like really innovative and cool. But like if they show up on campus at a career fair and then you go to the website and see a bunch of nuts and bolts, there's no way that you would realize that's a good opportunity. And so for anyone who signed up for the platform, you probably noticed that you actually rate companies on things like how much do you care about prestige, how much do you care about professional development. So if you put prestige as your top thing, you might be less likely to hear about that opportunity. But since they're great on compensation and professional development, if those were the things that you ranked highly, then you'd be more likely to get matched with that opportunity.
Cool. Does anyone else have anything to talk about the RippleMatch product itself? Or if not, we can talk about the next question, which has 2 upvotes. Sure. Yeah, I guess Andrew, you can also see it. Who is your biggest role model and how have they influenced your personal question, I guess?
That's a great question. I would say I feel like I'm trying to like I'll answer the actual question. I think it's a cop out. Like I feel like you sort of take different things from different people, and so there's definitely elements of that. I'd probably go with the like cliched answer though of my mom actually. Like I think even though she has nothing to do with like tech or startups, she is incredibly kind and incredibly hardworking, and I think generally does the right thing. And I think I don't know. I'm not sure like what the perception of startups is on like Yale's campus or just college campuses in general right now. But I think you read a lot about like the Adam Newmans of the world or like these incredibly or the Ubers or, these sort of CEOs who've like grown incredibly fast and have been incredibly aggressive and have like cut corners. And I think that in general, one of the most important things in building a business really is like, do people want to work for you for multiple years on end in a fairly like stressful, fast-paced setting? And I think the reason you generally retain people and attract really good people is because you're able to like really be there for them, have a ton of empathy, you're good on like the soft skills. And so I think she's like always been great there. And I think I'd actually say she's probably like the biggest role model on like that side of things.
For sure. This makes sense. Yeah, I guess this is a difficult question to answer in general because, like you said, like we take different things from different people. I guess on that note about your mom, I guess this is if you want to talk about it, like it's okay if you don't want to talk about this, but do you want to talk about that? How do you go about having that tough conversation with your mom about leaving Yale to do a startup? Or
yeah, I'm happy to take any of these. Yeah,
sure.
I basically was just like super nervous and I finally just had to bite the bullet. I like, you just try to avoid doing something for as long as you can, but then eventually it's just like not tenable anymore. I kind of let it get to that point. And then I think it was like honestly like a couple of weeks before I was supposed to go back for classes. So it felt like I couldn't just like not show up at school without telling my mom. So I gave her a call and kind of laid out all the factors and it's funny. She's like a really like pretty conservative like person in certain ways. Like has been a teacher her whole life. Very like risk averse in general. But she was at some point, and my mom like never cusses, but she heard like kind of how passionate I was talking about it and was like, "Fuck it. It sounds like you should go for it and see what happens." And I think people like always overestimate risk, right? Like they always it always like when you read these stories, it's like, oh my God, he dropped out of Yale. But like the reality is I could have just gone back if I failed, right? And so I think sometimes being really realistic about, is a risk truly a huge risk, or is it like actually one of the best moments in your life to potentially take a risk? Because like, if you think about it, like quitting your like high paying job when you have a 2-year-old and you've got like rent pressure facing you, and you know that like, if it doesn't work out, you're going to like have to move into a smaller apartment. That's like real pressure. Taking a year to try something cool and then go back and get a job at some great company after wrapping up your senior year at Yale is not like a super like challenging prospect. So I think I was actually really privileged, but I was able to sort of see that it wasn't maybe as risky as it like it seemed on some level.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a time in our life where it's the most ideal to take a risk right now. So I definitely agree with that. I guess there are a couple of questions. Which one should we? I mean, if there's any of this like call out to you, you can feel free to pick the questions as well. Like I don't want to be the one choosing the questions if you want to choose one of
Yeah, I'll just like I can just go rapid fire through all these if that sounds good. Is there
Sure.
anything you wish that you took more advantage of in college? Totally. I was just talking about this with some friends the other night. So, I think the best thing I got out of college was actually like just like one of those like really fun nights in your residential college if you're at Yale, or just like with your friends if you're not at Yale. Like I think I don't regret like any of the late night trips to like GHav, or just like some of those like hanging out on the quad, or just like you miss that stuff when you're gone. And definitely like appreciate like all of that a ton. I would say that in terms of like wishing I took more advantage of, I think I probably wish I worried less about having friends that were like quote unquote like cool freshman and sophomore year, and I wish I just like hung out with more like weird, interesting people. Like I think this is probably unique to me and not necessarily true to everyone, but I think it's easy to like get like caught up in like your little like social bubble and world. And I think part of the beauty of college is that there's sometimes these just like amazing people thinking of the world in really, really different ways. And sometimes we get caught up in these like bubbles and we sort of hang out with the same people. And like, I think for me, I felt like the last semester I was at Yale, I was starting to make this group of like, I don't know, just like way more different kind of friends from these like different areas. And I wish that I'd had like another year of just like doing that. I felt like I got that a little like cut short. So that's probably the biggest thing I wish I took more advantage of. And obviously like Pepe's and just like eating in New Haven in general, there's a lot of pretty good food. So that's all true. What is the culture like at RippleMatch? What are some of the core values you push employees to keep in mind? I think that there's a few things that are kind of unique about our culture. I think any really good startup culture is inclusive to people from different backgrounds. It makes them feel really welcome. I think the best startups feel a little bit more like a family. There's like hard times. And so you've got to make sure you're always able to like really bring people together. But I think part of what makes us unique is we also tend to be really direct and blunt about things. I think what's challenging is when you need to move really fast, if you just are like always positive in feedback and always like sort of like scared of like giving really honest, direct feedback, you're not able to move fast enough. And so I think one thing we've worked really hard on is just being like honest, so people don't feel like if someone's like, hey, this project is totally not what we were going for, like it's like a personal indictment, but just something that like rolls off their back, and so we can figure out stuff together. So I think that's really, really important. And then I think just like we also tend to have a huge bias towards action. I think like in a startup, like it's super easy to let stuff like just pile up or like be like, oh, that's someone else's to deal with. But I think a lot of what matters most is not like, it's fine if you fail, you just have to like try to do stuff differently. And so I think we really encourage people to take risks and not be satisfied with the status quo a little bit too.
I see. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'll keep going.
I mean, the next question should be pretty fast maybe, but it's more of a factual thing.
Customer acquisition is just, we have both students that we partner with on campus. We partner with clubs and organizations. So like YHack, stuff like we're doing here is part of how we get the word out. But we also, a lot of times when companies reject a candidate, they'll end up encouraging them to sign up for a RippleMatch profile. So we actually get a lot of signups through our company partners too, because it allows them to sort of help students who were maybe not a great fit for Uber, but would actually be a really good fit for Zillow or whatever it is, end up getting a good job. And then COVID was crazy. Like in March, like we were sort of just like, oh my God, like we all are like work's gonna be messed up. We ended up having to do like a light round of layoffs, which was really, really hard to go through. And then the opposite kind of happened. It was actually really good for our business because a lot of what we do is remote recruiting, and we didn't quite know how to like weigh the fact that a lot of our customers in travel and hospitality have been really affected, with the idea that a lot of our customers who've been using it successfully would end up doing way more on the platform. So we've actually ended up like beating our plan for the year, but it was like a very like whipsaw, jagged, crazy feeling. And I definitely lost some serious nights of sleep in the month of March.
I guess the second part of that question is also pretty interesting. Like, do you see the future of recruiting as like any changes in how recruiting will be done because of COVID? Like, would there be more remote type of recruiting just because people, I mean, it's the same idea as how jobs might tend to become more remote in the future. I think some tech companies are saying that. So do you think the same thing will be true for recruiting?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think every startup's like COVID, like the buzzword right now in VC is like COVID has accelerated our business, and now like we're way ahead of schedule. And I think for some businesses that's like not going to be true, right? Like objectively, when COVID comes to an end, less people are going to be using Zoom. That's why their stock price went down 20% yesterday when Pfizer announced that it had come up with, some type of vaccine potentially. And so I think it's that's not true for everybody, but I think in recruiting it actually really is true. I think that the status quo in recruiting has been companies recruiting from like the same 4 or 5 schools year after year. And if you think about it, that's pretty crazy from both the talent and diversity recruiting perspective, because you're recruiting from a very narrow population, and like you're objectively going to find better students if you can scan through 1,200 campuses than if you can scan through 5. And so I think what's happening, at least for our customers, is a lot of them were like really set in their ways, but now they're using our technology to recruit for the first time, and suddenly they're getting hires that have way better internship experiences, come from a way more diverse range of backgrounds. And so I'm pretty confident they won't go back to the status quo. And I think we'll actually kind of look back on COVID as this moment where the space kind of leapt like 4 years forward overnight, which is not something you see all the time, but is a really, really cool trend we're seeing right now.
Cool. I'm seeing if there's any overlap that we can, I guess there are 4 questions. Yeah, I guess the first one is something that's relevant to like people who are interested in starting up like now as college students. So like what's one thing, I mean, it's a very generic question, but what's the most important thing that you wish you knew when starting out? Or what would you give to current students who are interested in the startup space?
I think one, founding a company is not for everyone. Like, I think you've got to really, really believe that's what you want to do. And I think startups get really glamorized. Like, I think you sometimes like watch shows like Silicon Valley, and it's like you write a few lines of code, you raise some venture funding, and then oh shit, you're like a unicorn. And I think that in reality, there'll be a lot of really hard nights. There'll be a lot of moments where you're watching your friends at really safe jobs, and they'll seem like they're going in their careers, and you're like, well, I feel like this is about to fail. You'll get rejected by a million investors. And so I think it comes down to one, just like really wanting that experience and being able to approach it with a growth mindset. I think it's the kind of thing where if you just know you want to be an entrepreneur, or you're so passionate about an idea that you'll get up again and again, you have a good shot at being successful. I'd also say find a good co-founder, which I know I like hit on early, but I think there's a reason that teams of co-founders are so much more likely to succeed, especially for first-time entrepreneurs. It's just a big burden to shoulder alone. So having someone who you can really believe in, you'll kind of push each other forward, and that makes a really big difference, I think.
Yeah, I think on that related note, as in the same idea of starting up, like what are some resources that were most helpful for you when you were first starting out, I guess?
Yeah, if you're building like a software business, SaaStr is really good. So it's like Jason Lemkin's blog. He writes really, really well on like what goes into building a company. And it's the one resource that's like kind of scaled the test of time. I read it obsessively when I was first starting the company, and I read it a lot now. Great startup books that I think are just like worth reading in general. 0 to 1 is really good. Eric Ries's Lean Startup is also a really, really good read. I would say if you're starting to manage a team for the first time, both Radical Candor and High Output Management are really, really good. And then I think just talking to entrepreneurs is also really important. I think it's important to distinguish the people writing the checks from the people who've actually built really big businesses. Sometimes they're the same things, but they're often not. And I think just talking to actual operators, not people who've like been in the corporate world and are now like moonlighting as startup advisors, but people who've actually taken a startup from 0 to $10 million in annual recurring revenue, who've actually, had to have those customer conversations and those hard product trade-offs. Those people, I think, make a really big difference for sure.
Yeah, and then for this, I think this last question, I think you've covered quite a lot of points over the course of the talk. And having the ability to like commit to, I mean, it's not for like startup not being for everyone, being able to commit to the startup. Do you have anything else to add for this question? If not, we could also just skip this, because I think you've answered this in various ways. throughout the talk?
Yeah, I think I probably touched on that in a few different ways. If I had to put it in 3 words, though, I would say perseverance, ability to listen to the customer, which is like 5 words, so I cheated on that one. And then just like a sense of fun, right? Like I think startups have to have some fun in them. They can't just be like mindless powering away because it's too hard. So I think you have to sort of see the fun in things a little bit, which I know sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Then I guess the last question before maybe we ask the audience if there's any other questions. If not, we can always end. But what are RippleMatch's future plans for growth? Yeah, I guess pretty general.
I could probably talk for an hour on that question and won't bore you guys with a full hour of that. But I would say I would say that a lot of our vision is to really become the operating system that all companies use to manage all of their campus recruiting. So not just sourcing the right candidates, but actually helping them determine who they should hire, really robust analytics, the ability to sort through all of their inbound applicants, helping them manage all of their events. And so on the company side, it's creating this really, really balanced ecosystem. And then on the student side, it's just continuing to provide more access to amazing opportunities. I think we're maybe like I'd say we're like at the middle layer of where we'll ultimately be. But right now in RippleMatch, maybe if you sign up, you've got like a 1 in 10 chance of like actually finding your job through it. Ideally, you should just be paired with like the perfect 10 opportunities, and almost no matter what, it guides your whole search. I think people will always apply to the Facebooks and Googles of the world just because they've got such good brands and you're sort of like going to have inbounds. But for the most part, at least like 80% of your search should all be powered through a single system that knows you incredibly well and does all the hard work of surfacing the right opportunities for you.
Okay. If that's it, I mean, it's also 8 p.m. Eastern. I don't know where everyone else is in the world, but so I guess we can wrap up. If there are there any last burning questions? If not, let's just give a few seconds. Sure. If not, then I thank you for your time, Andrew. Yeah, it was a pleasure having you discuss your experiences, and it was definitely very illuminating in terms of like the startup and starting up a company in college and just general advice in general.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if any of you do go the entrepreneurship route, good luck too. I think it's been an amazing journey for me. And while I don't think it's for everyone, I think that if you're really passionate about something, I think being in college or starting it out at a really young age should not actually hold you back from achieving it. Worst case scenario, you'll learn a lot. Best case scenario, you'll end up being able to create something kind of enduring in the world, which is pretty cool if you're able to pull it off in your 20s.
All right. Yeah. So to everyone else, participants of YHack, I just dropped the link to the raffle form for the YHack raffle, so you can be sure to fill it out to get some cool tag, for a chance to get some cool tag at the closing ceremony. Yeah, and beyond that, yeah, I'll just thank Andrew again for this amazing talk, and yeah, that's it, I guess, for the workshop.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet all of you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.